Okay, this recipe is for flaky pastry, and to make flaky pastry you need 250 grams of strong plain flour, and on this plate I've got 75 grams of white vegetable fat and 100 grams of butter, and I've left both of these out of the fridge because you need them to be soft. Normally when you're making pastry you want everything as cold as possible, but for this particular layered pastry you want your fats to be nice and soft. You want them to be the same consistency as the dough when you are adding the fat, so that you don't tear your dough as you are putting the fat into it. So you just need to mash them together until it's all one colour, and then you need to reshape this to a block, and it doesn't have to be a perfect square, but it does need to be reshaped to a block so that you can cut it nice and easily into 4 pieces. So as long as it's roughly back into a block, it will be fine. And you can then divide this into 4. And because it's soft, it's a little bit more tricky to divide it up into 4, but you can do it. So having divided your fat into roughly 4 equal parts, you take 1/4 and you add that into your strong plain flour. And if possible, you use strong plain flour because it allows the gluten to develop. This first quarter you're just going to rub in with your fingertips, same as you would normally do. So it should be thumbs over fingertips, and it's quite a small amount of fat to be adding to this flour, but it just helps to make the pastry a little bit shorter. So it just helps to give a little bit more crumble to your pastry when it's done. So make sure that you get down to the bottom of the bowl so that the fat goes all the way through the flour, and that you try to just use your fingertips. So I believe that is rubbed in, and if you're not sure, the easiest way to check is to shake your bowl, and any large lumps will come up to the top, but there are no large lumps in there. So I'm just going to wash my hands before the next step. Okay, the next step is to add your water into this mixture, and I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4 tablespoons of water to start with, which would be more water than you would use with short crust pastry, but for your flaky pastries you need a nice soft dough which is going to stretch and form your layers. So that does not look like it's enough to me, so I'm going to add 1, 2 more. So that is 6 tablespoons of water, and if you wanted to measure it on a measuring jug or something else, that's 90 mils of water that I have added so far. And I can see from looking in there, although it's starting to stick together, that's still going to be too dry. So another 2. So at the moment I've got 8 tablespoons of water in here, which is 120 mils. And that is now starting to come together to form a dough. So when you think that your mixture is going to start to come together and form a dough, you can put your hands in and squeeze it together. Ideally with this sort of pastry you would have a slightly wet dough rather than a dry dough, and to be honest, I think that is all the dough that I'm going to get. So I'm just going to put it on the worktop, and I'm going to leave those extra bits of flour in the bowl today because I just want a nice soft dough, and I would rather have it a little bit sticky than a little bit dry, and this has to be kneaded until it goes nice and smooth. At the moment the surface is really uneven, and I'm just going to knead that until it's nice and smooth. Okay, the dough is a lot smoother than it was, and I now need to roll this out. So a little bit of flour on the worktop and a little bit of flour on the top, but don't overdo it. Because you've used strong plain flour, when you start rolling this out, you should be able to see that you roll it out and then your dough shrinks back again. And as you are rolling it, try pulling the corners and the edges of your dough flat and square. That will make it much easier for you later on. And you want to try and roll this dough out, in my case, so it's twice the length of my hand and once the width of my hand. It's the easiest way to work out how long you need the dough to be. And don't be worried about keep pulling it out at the corners, because it's a stretchy dough and it will take that. So it shouldn't tear as long as you are careful with it, but you should be able to stretch it out. You need the dough to be longwise in front of you, so about 1 hand width and 2 hands length. So I need this a little bit longer before I start to add another portion of the fat to it. So now that's better, 2 hands long, 1 hand wide. And you need to mark your dough into 3. Don't cut the dough, just mark it. And then you take another 1/4 of the butter and the white fat, and you put it onto the dough in little blobs. You don't spread this. It's quite easy to spread this and not to blob it, but it's nice and soft, and you just need it to cover the top 2/3 of your dough in blobs. And you need to use the whole 1/4. So if you have to go back and add in a few extra blobs, that's fine, but by the time you're done, all of that fat has got to go on, and it's easier to put it on 1/4 at a time. And the idea of the blobs is that when you fold your pastry up, you will have little pockets of fat which will help to make your layers, and the gaps in between will contain air, which will also help with your layers. So take the bottom third of your pastry and fold it up to the middle, and this you can see is where you need your corners to be straight. Just use the length of your hands to press and make a seal along the edge, and then the top comes down, and if you have to, just pull the edges out, bring the top down so that it makes a complete seal over your pastry. If you want to, you can make that seal even firmer using your rolling pin, and then you need to pick your pastry up, a little bit of flour in your worktop, and I've turned the pastry round 45 degrees. When you're rolling your pastry for the second time, you can't roll it as normal, because what will happen is, I don't know if you can see that moving, but there's a lot of air trapped in there, and you will just push all the air and the fat out of the end of the dough. So put your rolling pin on top and rock, and you should be able to see that the trapped air here is moving up and down, and I'm trying not to burst the air bubbles. And I need to roll this so it's about the same length. If a little bit of fat comes out of the ends, don't worry about it. But I also need to do the same thing in this direction. And I can see a little bit of fat is coming out the edge there. I'm just going to scoop that bit up and get it off where I'm trying to roll the pastry. But I need to get it to the same size again, so about 1 hand wide and about 2 hands long. If you have time, if you're doing this in an exam and you've got your 3.5, 4 hours, you can leave the pastry to rest in the fridge between doing these different rollings. If you don't have time, just be really gentle. But you can see I've still got air bubbles in it, and I want to keep those air bubbles. So I'm still not quite rolling it normally, but it is one width and nearly 2 in length. And then you repeat what you've done before. So divide into 3, take the next quarter of your butter, put it in blobs again, on top of your pastry, top of your dough. And when we folded it up last time, we had 3 layers. So we'd gone from 1 sheet of pastry, we'd folded it into 3, and then we had 3 layers. This time when we roll it up, we're going to end up with 9 layers. So we will have more layers in our pastry. So it's the same thing, the bottom third comes up to the middle, and I'm just going to brush that extra little bit of flour off there, and then the top third comes down and completely seals there. Now, because I'm doing this at home and I've got time, I'm going to give this 5 to 10 minutes in the fridge, and then I'm going to repeat. So I'm just going to seal the edges, pop that onto a clean plate in a minute, put that in the fridge for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll do the same thing. I will roll it again, put my last quarter of fat in, fold it up, and then I'm going to roll twice more without adding any fat. And as I say, in between the different layers, you can give it a chance to rest and relax. It is better if you've got time to give it to rest and relax. Otherwise, you just have to keep rolling your pastry and adding the fat and getting the layers. But again, there is air trapped in between these layers, and I've now got 9 layers in my pastry. This is the last rolling of the pastry. I've rolled it 3 times to put the fat in, which should have given me 3, 9, 27 layers. I've done it once more without adding the fat, which would give me 27, 81 layers, and I'm just going to do it once more without adding any extra fat to this, and then I should have hopefully about 240 layers in this pastry. And you can see as you work with this and you do the extra blind rolls, it does become much easier to work with, but you can still see I'm not quite rolling it normally, and I can still see I have bubbles of air, so I know that I have air trapped between the layers to help give me all my layers of pastry. So this is the last rolling. I'm going to fold it into 3 and just brush any extra flour off the top. Last third down into 3. It's much more of a block of pastry now, and I'm going to put that in the fridge until I want to roll that out and use it. So that's just going to sit on the plate, and I'll cover it with cling film until I want to use it. To clean your worktop, it is going to have pastry stuck on it. If you can get out a palette knife, which is nice and bendy, and keep your palette knife straight, you can actually scrape most of the flour and any fat that has got stuck. You can scrape off together like that, and then it's much easier to put in the bin.